asked him if I could sleep with other men to get more experience. He kicked me out right away. Hello, Redditors. I'm Lynn_200, and I was married with a sweet pair of twins, a boy and a girl who are both in high school aiming for scholarships into very nice colleges, while my ex-husband Asher, pays for tuition as per the verdict of the judge when we got our divorce. So I don't know how to talk about this, but I'll try. I don't want to be judged, although I know this is all my fault. Okay, so I met Asher in my senior year in high school, when I was just entering puberty. I was a late bloomer, and I was finding it difficult to get by despite having been in the school since my middle school and junior years. I was horrible with social interactions, so I had come across as mute at school for a long time, and I kept it that way. But for some reason, despite being the invisible girl, Asher had found me somehow, and we got talking. Asher followed me around till we went to college, and before I knew it, we were dating, and fast forward to 2 years later. We were tying the knot, saying our vows, and sharing a kiss in front of a crowd of family and friends. Okay, as weird as this may sound, I am what the older folks might call a cold woman, and the youngsters would describe me as a wet blanket. I was not very active in the bedroom, and my husband was the type with a fairly high libido, and as such, this affected us. Now, my husband did not explicitly or outright complain about it, but he hinted at it, and not just on one occasion. Asher had asked me one night while we were resting after this workout. I was trying to catch my breath, and Asher was just trying to come down from the high and all that adrenaline. He had asked me why I was such a wet blanket. I asked him what he meant by that, but I was too exhausted to keep talking. So I took a deep breath and kept my head against his chest as we lay on the bed. Asher had told me not to get him wrong, but that the stereotype was that it was the quiet ones that were usually the freaks in the bedroom, and that this has been proven to be correct around 90% of the time, but that it was a wonder that I was so different from what he thought. I sarcastically replied that he had all the time while we were dating to figure out if I was really a freak in the sheets. Asher sighed and told me not to get angry, stating that he was saying what he thought, and I felt so angry, so much rage bubbling inside me that I began to shake a little bit, so I took my head off his chest and just lay on my back beside him. I told him that it was not my fault that I did not have enough stamina to keep up with him. I reminded him that my lifestyle did not allow me to attract partners and explore. I reminded him that I had just dated the first people that approached me. I never took initiative, and all my relationships always ended badly. I turned on my side, facing away from him before I continued, adding that my relationship with him was the only one that did not blow up to smithereens, and that I could not believe that it was my low libido that would ruin something that made me so happy. I was trying hard not to cry as I spoke. I had heard stories of how people ended up with broken homes and marriages because the intimacy was lacking, and maybe the wife could not satisfy her husband. I hated the possibility of chasing Asher into the arms of another woman because I was not very active in the bedroom, whereas he had a high libido. Asher, the good man that he was, tried to comfort me. He turned, wrapping his arms around me and assuring me that he was not really bothered by it, and that he was just expressing himself and telling me his thoughts. I wanted to call him out on being a liar because what he said was exactly what he said he was not doing. Asher was complaining, and I would have to be more than daft to not have understood the meaning hidden behind the words. So I sighed, opting to just agree with him and call it a night. I told him it was fine and that I was not angry anymore, and that he should hold me till morning if he could, to which he readily agreed to, and we slept. Well, he slept. I stayed awake longer thinking, planning, and trying my hardest not to burst into tears. So the next month got me thinking, even while I was at work. My brain was running faster and more than usual, resulting in nasty headaches and migraines that threatened to split my skull apart, but I could not really help it. I had to do something. I had to keep Asher from running off with another woman. Now this is where the story really begins. This is how my misery came about. So I got myself a boy toy. Yes. The selectively mute woman with next to zero stamina and an almost wet blanket in the bedroom got a boy toy. I had 2 friends, partners in crime that I had met on one particular outing where I went to a club to drown my sorrows in alcohol, and then go home to cry my eyes out because Asher would not be home to see me lose it. Both women were in open relationships, the kind most of the younger folks were into these days, with their other extramarital partners, but I was not really that confident, so I could not really follow in their footsteps completely. So it was mostly to make up for the lack of experience on my part, to keep my husband from looking outside of the house for relief. These women taught me a lot of stuff about intercourse and pleasure in a whole other dimension, and how to pick out the best partner, as well as bend any man I would ever show interest in to my will. They promised to turn me into an amazingly sensual woman. so I followed in their footsteps, and all while hiding it from my husband, which was sort of tedious. But I had to actually keep up appearances till my husband was fed up and wanted to try something to spice things up. Then I could easily blow his mind and showcase the new skills I got from watching explicit videos and the likes online. I had actually tried to do it like those very sensual women do it in the videos, but I kept failing woefully. I would get Asher in the mood, but then I wouldn't be able to keep it up, and it would start to spiral till I'm a breathless, half-conscious mess in bed, and I knew I had to do something. Darla and Aura introduced me to the wonderful world of club hopping because I had confided in them about my problems, and they in turn told me about their very interesting lives, which I was fascinated by and ready to follow in, so I joined them, and they started to fish for a partner for me. A partner that I was eager to get like they did. Darla was a gentle lover, that is. She loved to be taken gently and lovingly, so she taught me how to seduce, gentle caresses, and little teasing that would make a man crave more. Now, I was not really a stranger to restraints in bed. I mean, I had seen some of those things online, on some R-rated websites and explicit videos and pictures of the sort on the internet as an adult. But what I had no experience in, what I was a stranger to, was experiencing it for myself. That is, getting restrained in bed. Aura taught me that. The whole restraining your partner and limiting their movements and even speech too was a whole other dimension. Aura was the adventurous sort of lover who enjoyed open relationships with multiple partners, unlike Darla, who was only in an open relationship because she was not really looking for another one. Aura did play it safe, though, taking the necessary measures to ensure that both she, herself, and her partners were safe and cleaning, since they were having other partners. Aura enjoyed watching her partners writhe and struggle in restraints, and she also liked to be tied up too. But for me, she would be the one that did the restraining and teach me how to put someone else, my partner, through so they could pleasure me like that, and I played along. It was exhilarating. My senses were heightened and I was so sensitive it almost hurt. Aura was aware that I was also with someone who would not take too well to seeing bruises on my body. I was talking about Asher, so Aura only let me practice with fur-lined leather cuffs that were gentle on my skin, which she always made sure was lubed up before she would secure the leather to my wrists and ankles to keep me from bruising, or too badly, rather. My husband actually mistook my reddened wrists for skin irritation of the sorts and pampered me for it, kissing and nipping at my wrists as we made love. And for once, after so long, I was able to keep up with Asher long enough for him to be close to relief before I passed out immediately after he was satisfied. We were okay like that. I began to use my newfound sensitivity to my advantage, but it did have some disadvantages, such as the fact that I would get aroused at the slightest touches from Asher. So much that even just Asher holding my waist left me with weak knees, and he seemed to love it, so I dealt with it. It was fun, I won't lie. I felt powerful being desired like that, having very attractive men at my beck and call, just like my friends. Sort of, well, since I did not really sleep with anyone else immediately after meeting Aura and Darla. And these women had guaranteed that they would help me enjoy pure marital bliss through their guidance, and with how much confidence they exuded, it was easy to believe them. They introduced me to a partner after a while, after multiple club hopping experiences and drinking and dancing while I let multiple hands caress my body. I had seen them work, so I knew how to work in on the dance floor for a bit, the retreat back to the VIP lounge to watch the club and observe potential partners. I had been close enough to know about their regular dealings too, so I could enjoy a night out like they did. Exactly why I say it was fun. A new man to satisfy me and let me experience more than one sort of lovemaking. Of course, nighttime activities with Asher seemed to improve, and Asher was none the wiser, adjusting the change to his own personal efforts, and I had to keep myself from laughing sometimes. But as long as he was happy, I was okay with it. Sort of. It started to feel wrong after a while, after around a year of playing hide and seek and club hopping to find a partner till I was introduced to Xavier briefly. Xavier, who I kept in contact with and talked with online for a while to work up the courage to meet him in person and get it on. See, no matter how good you were at hiding around, karma made sure that your luck would definitely run out. And she made sure that the luck you were so proud of would run out in quite the phenomenal manner. So it was my turn, and I, luckily, could see it coming somehow, and I prepared as such to cushion my fall in case it was on rocky ground. I believed I was a smart and cautious woman, but I was wrong. Asher started to behave strangely. He did not touch me as frequently or intensely anymore, and he was now more than interested in my movements, wanting to spend more time with me, and I could feel that something was about to go wrong, so I reached out to Darla and Aura. I began to cancel out our prior engagements, putting our pre-planned meetings on hold, Even a joint outing where Darla, Aura, and I would go out on a weekend outside of town, and then retreat to a club to pick up a partner for me. Sort of look through since I was not ready to do anything with Xavier yet, and then continue to a hotel afterwards and maybe have a little fun too. I had to cancel because it felt like my husband was starting to be on to me. He would want to watch movies on Saturdays and go on walks every other evening, and on Sundays we would eat out while we left instructions for the children, if they were home, since they were usually with grandparents of either side on every other weekend. I acted accordingly. I played the perfect wife since I was not really ready to call things off with Xavier yet. Now that I think back, I should have called it off and maybe saved myself all the trouble that came with continuing with them. Xavier came along after the air cooled down, after all the suspicion and observations died down. I mean, even the car or cars following me had retreated, and no one was stalking me anymore. It had taken 4 months of close surveillance to get the monitors away from me. Asher had told me one night that he was sorry for neglecting me, telling me that it was because he was having some personal issues and a few doubts. He tried to cover it up and say it was not about doubting me, but I could tell that much was a cover-up, but I pretended not to know. I hit Asher with the listening ear and the pout about how we were a team and that we should be able to help each other with our problems. I tried to sternly tell him that he should be telling me when he had any problem, so that I would help him, or I would try to help him in any way I could, no matter how difficult the problem seemed to be. Asher was overcome with emotion, and we ended up making love till the early hours of the morning, which resulted in my back being blown out, and me walking in a limp with a delicious aching in my hips and my thighs too. Xavier was an acquaintance and something like a partner of Aura. Both of them enjoyed the same things in the bedroom, and since the relationship I was looking for was a very open one, Aura felt it would not be too bad to introduce me to Xavier. And while I was skeptical about adding a new number to the mix and potentially shaking up what the three of us had going on, I was also down for it. Xavier also happened to be the person I had spent almost an entire year talking with and working up the courage to meet up with. I was supposed to be the last person to meet up with Xavier after Darla and Aura had talked to him and briefed him about the relationship and our already established rules and regulations, and I agreed to it. Aura and Darla told me that Xavier had readily agreed to the rules we had set, so I would have nothing to worry about when we met to talk about my own hard nose and any other rule or rules I may want to add with my partner. We had agreed to meet up at a nice quiet restaurant with Darla driving me and then waiting for me outside the restaurant while Xavier and I talked inside privately. When I walked into the restaurant, Xavier had tensed up a bit, and his eyes had gone somewhat wide at the sight of me walking in, but his expressions changed so fast that I was not sure about what I saw anymore. I could not tell if what I saw on his face was surprise, recognition, or straight-up lust. Now that I think about it, Xavier was pretty good at controlling his emotions and facial expressions. A true performance. A certified actor and seasoned playboy/liar, and I feel so fooled. So after I had taken a seat and placed a small, simple order, we waited for our food and drinks to arrive before Xavier and I began to talk. Of course, about my own limits, and Xavier nodded in understanding before he told me that he already got the gist of it from Darla and Aura, who had linked us up, but that it was much better to get the full details of it from the person in question. Xavier had the sweetest of smiles on his face as he said this, and I could not help the shy smile that graced my features at the thought of a stranger actually wanting to listen. We talked at length about everything in general, but with the exception of my marital status. I did not really lie about it, but I told him that I would not be telling him about it. The look he gave me when I said that was suspicious, and I pointed it out, but Xavier assured me that everything was fine, that nothing was wrong at all. So I had let it slide, and we continued with our date until I had to leave with Darla, and we said our goodbyes after agreeing on a date to meet for a session, which I told Darla and would later have to tell Aura about too. The first time Xavier and I had slept together, when we decided that it was time to leave first base, he had booked us a suite in one of those high-end fancy hotels. I wondered why, and I asked him, and he said that he wanted our first time to be somewhat special, as he wanted to prove that he was just as good a partner as he was to Darla and Aura, and I felt flattered by his reasoning, so I did not question it any further. Clothes were overrated and they were thrown off in just a few moments, so we could spend an hour on foreplay just the way I told him, and I'm sure Darla told him that I liked it. After that, Xavier suggested we take a bath and use the old lady's first line to get me in the bathroom first, while he set the mood for me to enjoy once I was through with my shower. Xavier took a shower after I was done, and we got down to it once he joined me on the bed. Slowly, we worked ourselves till we were close to that peak of pleasure, as Xavier was sliding inside me, rocking his hips in slow but firm strokes that hinted at him knowing exactly what he was doing. I found myself moaning like the women in those adult videos, and I loved it. He was just as much of a perfect blend of hard and gentle like Asher, and it felt so good that I was tumbling over the edge so quickly that I didn't even know it till I was shaking and whining. But Xavier was not stopping. In fact, he was faster and harder now, slamming home over and over again. And then he was kissing me gently. It all ended with me panting, and I passed out afterwards. My times with Xavier had to be one of the best I had experienced with anyone, and it left me wanting more, starving even. And I was eager to have some fun back home, so I started to drop hints at Asher, wanting him to take me, make me feel that peak again. It was barely 2 months after my session with Xavier, and Asher was hardly around. His work had gotten a bit more demanding, so he was on overtime 3 days a week for the 2 weeks, so I was sort of starved. But I did not have any sessions booked down by Darla and Aura soon. Asher was not just busy, actually. He was acting weird too. A little bit secretive, like the time that he had been monitoring my every move before. And I was genuinely confused, but I still pretended to be oblivious and still played innocent, and just dropped a hint or two that I was starving for touch. It actually worked, and for once, to Asher's surprise, I told him exactly how I wanted it, instructing him to move like Xavier, imitate him, and Asher did not disappoint. He gave it to me just the way I wanted it, and we both collapsed in bliss. I was sore, but very much pleasantly sore, and I loved it. I passed out again, and I think Asher continued, but I did not mind. I would definitely not regret it afterwards. Of course, I got a hot bath and back rubs afterwards, and I had my insanely talented boyfriend to thank for it. But the bliss made me a bit careless and painfully loose. I was so relaxed and lazy that I spoke out of turn and ruined the beautiful thing I had going on for me with my big mouth. Asher and I were lazing around the house on a Saturday. He was out on the couch while I was comfortably on him, spread out on his chest with my legs tangled in his. I ran my fingers across his chest in a sensual manner before I kissed him, teasing him slowly to get him. Both of us in the mood, and it worked because his arms came to wrap around my middle very tightly. Suddenly, I had an idea, so I broke the kiss to speak. I asked Asher if I could sleep with other men or another man to gain experience so I could please him better. And Asher looked at me with genuine horror on his face, and before twisting it into a look of absolute disgust, he suddenly pushed me off of his body where I had planted myself, causing me to roll to the ground. It did not hurt much because he did not really use force to get me off him, but it still hurt nonetheless. He started to pace around while I just sat there on my knees on the floor. Asher began to rant about something that I did not really understand until something about hearing about my other activities had reached his ears, and he had refused to believe it. He said he was waiting for me to slip up and hint at it or straight up just confess, but now that I had delayed so much, he had almost forgotten about it, and now he had remembered it. I was beyond confused, and I answered as such. I asked him what he was talking about, my fingers and hands moving rapidly to convey my thoughts, and Asher, the sweet darling, kept up with it, rolling his eyes before sighing at me to sit down before he got more annoyed with me. I gulped and stayed put, not moving an inch and barely breathing as I sat back on my heels. Asher returned to the living room with his laptop and a flash drive. I looked at him curiously as he started up the boot sequence of the system and then plugged in the flash drive when the system had booted up. He called on me to come, and I crawled over to him, and for some reason, despite the obvious rage and hate towards me, he asked me to come and sit between his thighs while he sat on the couch in front of the coffee table. He opened a folder, the only folder on the flash drive, and pressed play on the video there after reducing the volume on the system a little bit. My eyes widened at the sound of familiar noises that blasted through the speakers and echoed inside my head. I looked up at Asher, with on my face, but he just scoffed at me and pushed my head down, telling me to watch. The scene that unfolded before my eyes was of my most recent outing from 2 months prior, where I had gone out with my newest boy toy, Xavier, and we had somehow ended up in a hotel, and after an entire hour of kissing and light touching and groping, we had both taken a shower, him going first and me going last before we had fallen into bed, where he proceeded to rail me into the bed, to next week, effectively blowing out my back. He must have set up a camera while I was in the bathroom because the angle of the video showed a bit of my face and body while his own face had been edited and blurred out. But the voice was familiar. Even without the face, it was definitely me. It was definitely me shuddering and gasping and moaning under another man in the silk sheets of a hotel room while my husband was at home unaware. I could feel moisture on my face as Asher cut the video and took out the flash drive, closing the laptop shut before looking down at him. He pulled on my hair and commanded me to look at him. I let out a sob as I looked up at him, my tears falling to the sides of my head, and I was swallowing air because I felt like I was suffocating. Asher asked me what happened there. His voice and tone made it clear that he expected an answer and that there was no room for stalling or excuses. I whimpered as I brought my hands up to try and say something. There was no way I would have been able to speak in that situation, with sobs clogging my vocal cords and my body sort of shutting down part way, so I used my hands instead. Asher looked at my hands intently as I narrated everything I had been doing. I did not keep any part out of the explanation, and his face went from surprised to disappointed and finally angry and disgusted as he roughly let go of my hair so he could get up from the couch and pace around. I was grateful that the children weren't home now. They were with their grandparents, my parents, for the weekend. I cursed my big mouth as Asher turned to face me, opened his mouth to say something but couldn't get out words, and instead he shut his mouth again and resumed his pacing. This happened 2 more times before he stopped and took a deep breath and turned to face me again. I was sobbing silently, and my fingers were moving rapidly. I was saying apologies and pleading that Asher pardon my foolishness. Asher laughed at this and asked me what I thought I was doing. He asked what hope a witch has of handling love in a family. He also asked how he would be able to cope with the fact that his partner, his wife, had embraced and had been embraced by other men. I wanted to scream and tell him that it was his fault. I wanted to tell him that it was all for him. I wanted to tell him that I was already working to cut off the relationships and focus on him because no matter what, he, Asher, took precedence in my life, that he was more important than any other man or men. I wanted to tell him that he was my everything, but I decided against that. He was angry. I could see that, and I did not want to risk getting him more angry, so I kept my mouth shut and bowed my head to the ground like I was praying and pleading for my case. Asher just coldly told me to drop the act and get up. I replied that it wasn't an act, and he simply rolled his eyes at me. He told me that I should be out of the house by the next day, Sunday, and that he did not want to see me in the house by evening when he would be bringing back the children. He said it with so much finality that I knew that I had no chance to do anything or say anything again. It was the end. He had made up his mind, and I could guess that a divorce would follow after I left the house. I was in a trance afterwards. I did not know how I managed to go to the guest room and lay down. I did not sleep, though. I just laid there and stared at the ceiling as I felt like the world had come crashing down on me. I brought this upon myself, and everything I built came crashing down. I was ruined. Morning came a little too fast for my liking, but I had no choice but to accept it as it came. And I was grateful I had made that choice because it was barely 15 minutes past 6 o'clock that Asher barged into the room. I did not lock the door. I never did from childhood since I did not talk very well. So I had to leave the door to my room so someone could get to me in case of emergencies and the likes. And I had carried this lifestyle into my marriage, which meant that Asher had access to the guest room I had been banished to at the crack of dawnish. Asher reminded me that he did not want to see me by evening when he would bring the children back home from my parents' house, and I nodded, saying I was sorry, but Asher just sighed and rolled his eyes at me as he left the room, leaving me to pack my belongings. Asher did not make as much as a peep as he prepared, and left the house in the afternoon. Well, except to send a text for me to leave the key to the front door inside the mailbox, which I took note of as I packed up my suitcases and cardboard boxes with my other belongings that were not clothes or shoes. I looked back at the house one more time and bit my bottom lip hard enough to draw blood as I rolled my suitcases out and dumped them in the trunk of my car, along with my other belongings that were stored away neatly inside the car too. I could barely see the road in front of me as I drove off. Looking at the house again made me cry, but it was almost 6 o'clock in the evening, and Asher would be back at any time with the kids, so I had to go. I contemplated calling Darla to help me, but I knew I had already done enough. I had already messed up enough. So I did not call anyone. I did not want to answer any questions. In fact, I did not want to have anything to do with Darla or Aura anymore. I didn't even want to hear the name Xavier either. I would simply wait for the inevitable divorce that was coming my way. I drove out of town with one destination in my mind, and that was my old home, my parents' house. Update. Asher is happy, or so I heard. He was doing quite well the last time I saw him, and I can't say the same for myself, but I will manage. The divorce really came afterwards, around a month after I had left the house. I told my parents that I and Asher were getting a divorce and that it was simply because we felt that we weren't compatible enough anymore. An obvious lie, but my parents did not ask much, although the disappointment was evident in their face. But parents love their children, so they did not stay angry at me. I signed the papers quite late because I kept crying and trying to suffocate myself on my sobs in my old bedroom, but I somehow gathered the courage to sign the papers and get them back to Asher in time to prepare for the court. Like I mentioned earlier, I actually got custody of the children because they actually wanted to come with me while Asher would pay for tuition and help to raise them from afar. The children spent some weekends with him and even met his new partner too. It was on a Saturday that I received an invitation in the mail and another small package attached to it. The invite was to a wedding, Asher's wedding to his new partner. My jaw dropped and I had to bite my lip to stifle a sob while I tore open the small package attached to the invite. It was a small flash drive. The note attached to it said to watch it with the volume down and to be careful with my new life while I was at it. The flash drive had that awful tape, the one with me and Xavier that Xavier had filmed and given to my husband, who had used it as a basis for our divorce, even after kicking me out of the house disgracefully. I watched it without sound and I was disgusted with myself. The back of the invitation had another small note saying that the video I had just watched was the last copy of it, and I could do what I wanted with it, even upload it to an adult website since I had quite the talent and I had good visuals too. It was mocking me. It was definitely Asher insulting me. I did not know when I took up the flash drive and crushed it between my fingers and I was dropping off down to my knees and crying very ugly, painful sobs. Every day I wish I could go back in time and stop myself from making all those choices that led me to ruin. Stop myself from falling for Xavier's advances. If only I were content with Asher. If I had not agreed to go into a relationship with Aura to add me to her boy toys. If only I had stopped there, rather than allowing myself to drown in rage towards my husband and then getting it on with that treacherous snake Xavier. But I cannot really change anything. I mean, Asher got a cheating woman out of his life and I lost a marriage and a very good partner. I guess I should just focus on the children now. Maybe I'll be able to pull myself together and pull through.